now, if you're on your phone, you're less connected to the person seated next to you, but you're more connected to your kindergarten classmate. So social media has improved our connectivity to the people far away, but worsened our connectivity to the person sitting next to us. And the long-lasting human relationships are often from the person sitting next to you. So I worry about that, and I'm not sure if AI will help for lonely people because you have someone to talk to, or if it will exacerbate this isolation. And energy will show up, by the way, indirectly, because it's certainly be energy powering the AI, but it will lead to other things. We might have humanoid robots to become a companion for someone who's lonely, and that robot will be an electric load as well. So energy is part of this story.
Right, the robots will use quite a bit of electricity.
Right.
We say the robots are coming.
Yeah, robots are powered by electricity, not by heat. So that'd be new electric loads.
Welcome to Austinpreneur, our show about the stories that made Austin, Texas a global hub for startups. The show is produced by Capital Factory and hosted by me, Nick Spiller. As a reminder, by joining Capital Factory, you can plug into the ecosystem where the stories on this show were set. Learn more about us at capitalfactory.com. Welcome back, everyone, to the Austinpreneur podcast, where we discuss how Austin and the state of Texas became a global hub for technology, venture capital, and innovation. We're here at Fed Supernova in 2025 talking about dual use, innovation, and today, specifically in this episode, we're going to dive into next generation energy systems and everything happening around energy. We have a very special guest. This whole episode is brought to us by GTI Energy. We'll hear about that more. And we're very fortunate to have someone I've known for a while, and someone at least when I was a student at the University of Texas, someone who's known as one of the most popular professors on campus. In particular, if you have anything to do with energy and anywhere in the world, it seems like Dr. Michael Weber is right in the middle of it. So we're going to dive in. Dr. Weber's the John J. McKetta Centennial Energy Chair in Engineering, as well as the Sir Richardson Chair in Public Affairs. He's had a lot of roles. I'm not going to get into all of them, but he did do his undergraduate at UT, did the Plan 2 program, coupled with aerospace, hook 'em horns. He also studied at that school out in California called Stanford. And now he's back here. How long have you been a professor at UT?
I've been back now 19 years.
19 years.
Although I was born and raised on campus. So I've kind of been here my whole life, except for the California sojourn.
You were born and raised on campus?
My father was a chemistry professor. I was a faculty brat.
Really?
I was born on West Campus.
Nice.
Like 2 blocks off of campus.
So, it was probably a little different back then.
It was, now there's like 30-story buildings. It's all different. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Even when I was there was he's a few notable roles. CTO of Group Climate Impact Partners, Chief Science and Technology Officer at ENGIE. Did I say that right?
That's correct.
Over in Paris, and a lot of really interesting things you can look into. So we're going to dive in. I've got a few questions to talk, but we have an audience of innovators here at the Fed Supernova, and y'all have a chance to ask some questions as well. So, Dr. Weber, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. We've known each other a long time, and you guest lectured for my freshman freshman entrepreneurship class, I guess it really was, a decade ago. So I'm returning the favor a decade later.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in then
I'm
and
glad.
doing everything you did on campus and now for the broader community.
That's right. When I guest lectured, you told me something I've remembered. It even impacts this podcast. You built my confidence. I don't know if it's totally true, but you say your speaking is so good you don't need a deck, and just go dive into it. And I did it that day, and I've been doing it ever since. I've only used a deck a couple times. We don't really reference things on the podcast, and I found that to be a fun way to really engage in conversation. And the other fun fact is when I took over, I was offered the great opportunity to be the host of this podcast from Josh Baer. You may not remember, you're the first person I invited on the show.
I did not.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I hit you up on Twitter. You're like, man, I'm traveling. I can't do it. And just one thing led to another, but here we are.
We're finally making it good. So it's great.
Yeah. So let's dive in. And we'll kind of just take it head on. Earlier this year, the one big beautiful bill was passed. It's encompassed a lot of different aspects of society. I feel like we're all still digesting it. One that I've learned is energy and the policy around energy. So could you start there for the audience? What are the first things we need to know about this next era of energy generation.
That's great. Yeah. So if you look at the history of energy policy, there are eras where we invest a lot of time into legislative effort, then we ignore it for a decade or two, then we invest a lot of effort, then we ignore it for a decade or two. And there was a lot of attention on energy, say 2005 to around 2005 to say 2010. We ignored it for a while, then came back to it 2020 through 2025. Yeah, the very last bill that President Trump signed in his first term was the Energy Act of 2020. That was a bipartisan bill. And you had a flurry of bills under the Biden administration. The CHIPS Act was an energy bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the Inflation Reduction Act. So like a wave of bills. Two of those were bipartisan, one was partisan. And now the one big beautiful bill, which I now hear is called OB3 to differentiate it from OB1. Yeah. So anyway, so it's not a Jedi bill. It's a different kind of bill. I'm not sure exactly, but so the one big beautiful bill. Then there's a couple different ways to look at it. One is if you're a clean energy enthusiast, it feels like a step backwards, but that's in contrast with the Inflation Reduction Act. If we didn't have the Inflation Reduction Act, it actually would have been the biggest clean energy bill ever. Yeah. But it was less supportive than the IRA. And so it felt like going backwards. It's really supportive of clean molecules, hydrogen, carbon management. It's really supportive of geothermal and nuclear. These are good things. It is not supportive of wind and solar, or it opens a lot of opportunity for interpretation, and that makes a lot of people nervous. And so that's where there's a lot of concerns. Like, wait a second, it's putting the thumb on the scale for some forms of energy, and that's probably good, but it's putting an opposite sort of hindrance or anchor on other forms of energy, and that's bad because we're at a moment where we need as much energy as possible, especially as much clean energy as possible, and we need to be supporting all of them. This is my personal view. And so the bill feels like a setback on some things, but it's frankly quite good on many things. And I think the biggest concern is that it just injects a lot of uncertainty. So if you're in the energy industry and there's trillions of dollars of investment looming, and these are for assets that last anywhere from 20 to 80 years, uncertainty is bad. Yeah. So that's bad. But overall, I think energy industry moves forward. We need energy for quality of life. We need energy for growth. We need energy for security. We need energy for innovation. Energy will keep growing. We might see different things grow a little faster or slower, and we'll see the cost shift from our tax bill to our electric bill. So there's electric bills are going up. They're going to go up. This is like the most important thing I say is we've been paying for part of our electricity bills through our taxes with tax credits and tax supports for nuclear and ethanol and wind and solar and other things. But some of those tax credits will be expiring. We'll end up on our electric, but we still will build electric facilities, and we'll just pay for it differently. And that will show up politically. We'll see how it shows up, but there's an affordability crisis looming as a consequence, because now we have this other context of electricity demand grew for 120 years, and then it didn't grow for 25 years from 2000 to 2025, and now it's growing again. And so we're at a point where there's more demand, we need more growth, and kind of need everything. So there's a lot of policy uncertainty. But I think in the end, the fundamentals are the same. Coal's going to keep shutting down. Wind, solar, and gas going to keep growing. Batteries going to keep growing. And that's basically what the future is going to be. But how we pay for it might be a little bit different.
And then the other two that have seemed to come up, I'm curious your thoughts on our geothermal and nuclear energy. Does it seem like that's really a possibility to get to a meaningful level of scale?
I never really understand politics. I think about politics a lot. I'm a political junkie, but I never quite figured it out. I understand energy much better than politics. But we've evolved to this place where there are Republican forms of energy and Democratic forms of energy, which makes no sense if you're an engineer.
Right.
But there are a couple forms of energy that seem to have bipartisan support. Nuclear and geothermal seem to be there for a variety of security and performance and environmental reasons. Natural gas is one that's been confusing for people. Environmentalists didn't like for a long time. They've come around. And so natural gas is a place where there's a lot of support. Hydrogen and carbon capture seem to have some broad-based support. So there's some mix of radioactive materials and drilling and clean molecules. And then oil and gas, I should really say oil and coal are considered Republican, and wind and solar are considered Democratic. So that's kind of weird. And that's where we got to over the last few years politically. But geothermal, nuclear seem to be winners. Gas is certainly winning right now. Gas has been growing since like 2007 or something like that. So some of the fundamental trends will continue.
Oh. So you mentioned rolling back some of these government incentives for renewable energy, and the EV tax credit being one that got a lot of attention, and our community especially. But how do you think we strike the right balance between government support and just paying for it through our electric bill?
My grand unifying philosophy of governance, which I teach in my energy technology policy classes, is that the U.S. government is good at a few things and it's bad at a few things. The things it's really good at is funding the innovation ecosystem, protecting intellectual property, and setting the standards and regulations by which the market should operate. The government's really good at that. We invest in innovation historically better than the other nation in the world. I hope we keep that going. There's some reasons to worry about that. We protect intellectual property better than any other country in the world. I hope we keep that going. And we've been good about setting labor or environmental or other standards, performance standards, and then we let the markets figure out how to compete within that system. I think the government is bad at picking winners and losers, like determining what we should do. And so when the government bans fuels or technologies or mandates fuels and technologies, that goes badly. We've had a couple states try to ban natural gas. We had Wyoming try to ban electric vehicles. We've had states try to mandate ethanol at the federal or other level. So bans and mandates don't go well. And when the government sets the price, it doesn't go well. So what I'd like to see the government do if I were a king of the world is set an environmental standard, a performance standard, a reliability standard, a labor standard, and then just let the markets figure it out, as opposed to doing tax credits and things like that.
Right.
The tax credits are kind of an inefficient way to get to correcting the benefits that those who emit get. Like, so right now you can emit for free. You don't have to pay for the pollution you do. And so tax credits kind of counteract that. Probably we should remove the tax credits and just have a performance standard and reducing emissions or put a price on emissions. So that's a more efficient way to do it, is to use performance standards as opposed to tax credits. Tax credits become a political football. It goes back and forth. And so frankly, I'd like to see all the subsidies in, if it were up to me, but set a cleanliness standard with a performance standard. We'll get to the right answer that way.
And then invest in new technology.
And then invest in innovation. Yeah. So this only works if you prime the pump of innovation.
Right.
And so you heard I'm on the board of GTI Energy. That's a big innovation consortium, right? So there are universities, there's national labs, there's all sorts of places of innovation. Prime the pump of innovation, set the rules of the market, and then we'll get the right answer. That's what I think. And that has happened many times before with great result. That's how we got hydraulic fracturing. That's how we got price declines in batteries and solar. A lot of reasons that we can expect this to happen again.
Right.
And that's not what the one big beautiful bill does, by the way.
Right.
It's got like,
separate.
a tax credit for you, but take away tax credit for you. Like, it's not really doing those things that I just said.
Right. That's your Dr. Weber view of
That's my dreamy world, exactly, my utopia world.
Yeah, I like it. And and then it that early, obviously for our podcast, we're focused on that investing in innovation piece. We care a lot about government support in these deep technological areas. It's hard to take that risk as an investor. It needs to go. You have all these things to invest in, and at some level, you just need to make the most money possible. Is what your job is for the investors at the end of the day.
That's what the markets want. That seems reasonable, right?
Right. And you can kind of maybe push that a little bit, but it's like where you see some of these areas getting big funding initially, and then hopefully what I'm also seeing, I'm wondering in energy specifically, is like an increased participation from the private sector a little earlier, bigger rounds.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point. So let's go back in time 30 years ago. I'm a brand new graduate student at Stanford. I left UT, did my undergrad here, and I went to Stanford for grad school so that I could come back to UT as a professor, by the way. So Stanford was my number 2 choice grad school. UT was my first choice, but I thought I better take my second choice so I can come back to my first choice as a professor.
Spend your whole life.
Yeah, exactly. I got to leave for a few years. Yeah. And I've left Austin 6 times, by the way. I keep coming back. I keep leaving. I keep coming back.
Noticed.
So and I live in my childhood home, which is funny. So I'm right back where I made no progress. I'm right where I started. So the thing about Stanford, I was there in 95 to 2000, and Stanford felt like the center of the universe because that's when the dot-com boom happened. Software happened. We were playing intramural softball against these computer science students who were launching a startup called Google. We're like, whatever. My lab mate's roommate, Jerry Yang, was launching a company called Yahoo. We're like, oh, that's never, it's like, we're like, that's never going to work, right? So I was there watching the world start up with these internet sort of innovations and everything else. It was really incredible. And started to learn about the valley of death for funding, the valley of death, and crossing the chasm and all these things. And Inside the Tornado, all these great books about innovation and startups that came out in the 90s about software. And that valley of death is a funding gap getting from some of the earliest stage to the later stage things. But what's interesting for energy is that valley of death has moved to the right, if that makes sense, which is the early stage money has showed up for energy in a way that it wasn't there really even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But now the gap is to the right, which is more expensive. So it's gone from companies having trouble getting the millions of dollars in need to now companies having trouble getting the tens or hundreds of millions in need for the first of a kind or the pilots. And that gets really expensive. It's hard for venture capital. That's where loan program offices or there are other ways to solve that funding gap. It's still too risky for private equity maybe. But that valley of death, that funding has pushed to the right as earlier stage money showed up, and that's the private capital, which wasn't there for energy a long time ago, right? And I think that's a pretty interesting innovation because that means there's just more good ideas out there. They're getting funding, but there's also more good ideas that are going to need that later funding that's much more expensive.
Right. You go get after it. And we think we've seen space, robotics, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see a big boom in the energy side of
Yeah,
things.
and space and robotics are also expensive, and it had some early stage money show up, right? So they're all kind of going through the same evolution.
The other thing that's getting money and expensive to use a lot of electricity is AI.
AI, absolutely,
I
yeah.
understand. So maybe let's talk about that. You said electricity demand started to grow again. Is it because of these data centers or
It's partly, yeah. So electricity demand's been flat for 20, 25 years, primarily from efficiency, efficient light bulbs, especially look at all the efficient light bulbs we have in these buildings now. And so that removed a few percent off the top of national energy consumption, but also more efficient appliances. And in that time of level electricity demand over the last 20 or 25 years, the US population grew 20% and the economy grew like 270%. So we had incredible population economic growth, but no increase in electricity consumption because of efficiency. But some of the obvious efficiency gains have been wrung out of the system. So now we're going to see growth. It's data centers, it's heat pumps, it's electric vehicles, it's electric factories. It's just a lot of shifts in broader society. And it's pretty exciting if you're an electric person, but also means the system doesn't know how to grow because last time we grew like this at this rate was kind of the 80s, although the closest analog is actually the 1930s, which is the growth rate we're experiencing now is the same as about the 80s, but the growth rate in the 70s was faster than the 80s. So when we had the 80s growth rate for power, it was actually a slowdown from the prior decade. So the last time we've had this much growth in electricity, especially compared to no growth the prior decade, was from the 1920s and 1930s. So we got to relearn how to grow, which means regulators need how to grow and investors, and we got to build. There's a lot of stuff we just have to develop the muscle memory for because we don't have it. And people are now who've been in the industry for 25 years and never seen it grow, so it's hard to believe it's going to happen. AI is a part of that story. It's a very visible part of the story. It's also actually, frankly, kind of a small part of the story. It's a few percent. It gets all the headlines because the people who need the energy are so rich and in such a hurry. And this freaks people out. They're like, oh no, we're going to have our rates go up to make yet another tech bazillionaire richer. But they're the ones who have the money to invest in improving the system. So I'm actually pretty excited about it. And the way AI shows up in the grid at first is a strain on the grid. It will exacerbate all the problems we have in the grid. But in the long run, it should make the grid better because it should help us find better efficiencies or discover better battery chemistries quicker or design a fusion reactor in an accelerated form. There's a lot of things that AI should do for us, but for now, it feels like a strain.
Yeah.
And that's the headline.
It feels to me like we've kind of hit the upper limit. Just kind of going back to when you're at Stanford and internet started coming out, computing started to become a factor in all industries, and we developed all these applications and all these, software ate the world.
Yep.
And then, we took this step of generative AI, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, you just hit the ceiling. But you're saying that essentially now, because of that problem, these, the internet entrepreneurs, it's like that's forcing this new investment into energy.
I think that's exciting because we need to expand the power sector or the energy sector as a whole by trillions of dollars over the coming decade. And now there are people saying, we've got trillions of dollars, we'd like to invest it in the energy sector. So I'm like, okay, that's good. So we're going to build a bunch of wind, solar batteries, natural gas combined cycle power plants, backup systems, gas microgrid, you name it. And it's nice to have someone with money saying we will pay to expand it. Now they also want the power, so we might all be competing with each other. We have to make sure it all works out in a way that's fair and just, but I'm pretty optimistic we can, frankly. Yeah. And if you look at these data centers, the energy costs are like 3 to 7% of the cost. It's the chips, the people, the concrete, the water, like other things. And so they'll pay more for nuclear or geothermal because they want the cleanliness. They'll pay more for gas or carbon capture because they want the cleanliness and they want the reliability. And I think that's pretty exciting to have a willing payer, so to speak, because usually people are unwilling payers, right? We don't want rates to go up.
You got to keep the chips clean.
Exactly. And it's a big change. And the other thing I would say is AI is not new. So I think the phrase was coined like in 1956 or something. The underlying math has been around for a while. I took a class at Stanford in 99 on neural networks. I got an A. I don't even know what a neural network is, but I was really good at repeating back to the professor what they wanted to hear. And that's like basically some of the same math. It's pattern recognition. The math's been around for a long time. And it's just now in a easier to access form, or it's got large language models so you can talk to it. It's generative. There are other things about it, but it's been around for a while. And it's just kind of fun to see its use case really unlock for a lot of people. We should talk more about whether it's good or not. But anyway, it's certainly going to drive up electricity demand.
Yeah. Was it good or not?
I don't know. So I just kind of set you up for that. The AI race to me reminds me of the race for nuclear weapons, which is we haven't even decided whether it's good or bad, but we know we don't want the bad guys to get it first.
Right.
Yeah, and I think like we don't know. We don't have a moral conscience whether AI is better or worse for society, and a lot of reasons to be excited, a lot of reasons to be really scared, frankly. But we know it would be bad if the bad guys have it and we don't. And that's the race we're in right now. And I buy that thesis, actually, that actually we need to develop AI so that we're not a victim of it. And it raises all sorts of moral and ethical qualms for me. We see it in the classroom at UT. It's a problem. I worry it's going to undermine our ability to do critical reasoning and critical thinking. That gives me a lot of concerns. Yet at the same time, it will help a lot of F students become C students. And there's some value in that.
C's get degrees.
C's get degrees. I think AI will help you do mediocre work really quickly. And there's some real value in that in society.
Right.
Because a lot of work just needs to be mediocre, frankly, right? It's got to get it done.
Yeah.
It doesn't take you from C to A+.
Yeah.
In my eye. Now, maybe it will in some years, but in fact, it might take A+ to B+. Like there's some cases where I use AI and it makes the work worse, takes more time, and is less fun than if I just did it myself.
Yeah.
But I've seen some lower performing students use it to their advantage.
Yeah. This is maybe straying from the energy thing, but I agree. It's a technology. It's powerful. One of the any powerful technology, there's double-edged sword there. I feel it's exacerbating the isolation of the younger generation and just maybe society and like how people are developing relationships with AI, and just more and more
I worry
we're not connecting, which that was kind of the whole idea of the internet.
I feel like, I've got all sorts of concerns. I've got 3 kids in college right now, 19 to 26 through grad school. And there is an epidemic of loneliness on campus.
Yeah.
It's real. And it used to be in my era, you'd kind of talk to or date the person sitting next to you at the lunch table. We were very open in conversation. And now if you're on your phone, you're less connected to the person seated next to you, but you're more connected to your kindergarten classmate. So social media has improved our connectivity to the people far away, but worsened our connectivity to the person sitting next to us. And the long-lasting human relationships are often from the person sitting next to you. So I worry about that, and I'm not sure if AI will help for lonely people because you have someone to talk to, or if it will exacerbate this isolation.
Right. We'll see.
And energy will show up, by the way, indirectly, because it's certainly be energy powering the AI, but it will lead to other things. We might have humanoid robots to become a companion for someone who's lonely, and that robot will be an electric load as well. So energy is part of this story.
Right. The robots will use quite a bit of electricity.
Right.
We say the robots are coming.
Yeah, robots are powered by electricity, not by heat. So that'd be new electric loads.
We're here at Fed Supernova. It's an event we largely put on for our partners at the Department of Defense and broadly other federal government agencies. But what role does the military play in advancing new energy?
The military plays a lot of important roles. I actually got my start in energy working for the military. After I left Stanford, I went to a startup making industrial instruments, including inventing some chemical weapon sensors, sponsored by DoD. So I was a DoD partner for several years. Then I went to the RAND Corporation doing policy. And my first big energy study 20 years ago was on energy security for the Pentagon. I did it for an assistant to the Secretary of Energy Defense, assistant to the Secretary of Defense on energy security. And let's back up 20 years. I actually just dug out my presentation like a month ago on this.
Nice.
And it was all about Iran using oil and gas exports to get weapons it can use to threaten its neighbors. It was all about Vladimir Putin using oil and gas exports to control Europe. Nothing has changed, is what it feels like. It's the same people, same countries. What's changed is maybe we care less because of our sort of domestic oil and gas production. So the stakes might feel a little different to Americans, but the players are the same. And this was in 2005, before fracking, before the solar boom, before the wind boom, before the battery price declines. But it sort of highlighted the sense of we have vulnerabilities in the energy system. So domestic sources of fuels, domestic sources of minerals, and domestic technologies are good for us. That's my main conclusion. And so DoD did a lot of the early thought leadership work. DoD did a lot of the early funding of batteries. When 2005, when I did the study for the Pentagon, already by 2005, they said, do not dare give me, we need a better battery study. We've already had dozens of those. By 2005, they already knew we needed better batteries. They were putting a lot of money into that system. And so they are a thought leader, they're a funder of R&D. They also have special purchasing capabilities. So the government can do like 5-year contracts. DoD can do 20-year contracts. They feel the performance risks of a fragile energy system. And they can pay more for better energy that will improve warfighter capability and reduce resilience problems or vulnerability problems. And so the earliest adopter of a big solar farm is Nellis Air Force Base, for example, 27 megawatts. That's tiny compared to the big ones today. But they were the first big adopter of solar, first big adopter of biofuels for jet fuels. They've been thinking about solar desalination for forward operating bases, because every time you bring a truck of water, it's a soft target. Every time you bring a truck of fuel, it's a soft target. But if you have on-site solar to treat water or to do other things, you avoid those convoys, you save lives. So they're really feel it from the risk of lives and performance, everything in a way, and they have special budgets and purchase. So DoD has been critical to this along the way. And then we talk about the future of nuclear. Who does nuclear better than anyone? Well, the U.S. Navy, right? So there's a lot of capabilities of DoD that we benefit from in energy.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems within the DoD, it's life or death, and they can't let the politics divide them. I mean, maybe it still does, but when I talk to people, it's like, I remember Mayor Jim in Cedar Park was in the Army, and he told a story of 100 trucks backed up pulling oil into Afghanistan.
Oh, those narrow passes, those mountain passes are risky.
Everyone's there while you've got 100-degree heat just baking you in the sun, and in general, it seems like they're just approaching it in a way where they get as many different sources of energy, and there's all these different scenarios that could use different sources.
Absolutely, and the stakes are higher. The performance requirements are higher. You need your jet fuel to work on the heat of the tarmac in the Middle East or in Alaska in the winter, and so you need the right kind of liquid performance so that won't freeze or evaporate. There are just a lot of things you need in the military, and you're willing to pay for, because if you pay more money, you save lives, and that helps buy down the cost for the rest of society. And then there's a lot of spin outs, a lot of great examples happen, but there are a lot of things we say sound impossible. Like electric aviation sounds impossible. Well, the military's been doing electric aviation with drones for quite some time. Small modular reactors sounds impossible, but we have 150 or whatever small modular reactors in the sort of Navy, nuclear submarines, and aircraft carriers. So there's a lot of technology deployment that happens because of the stricter proving ground that they have, and the funding and the expertise and the labs and the continental bases where they can deploy things. So it's really a great partnership. And I think sort of with Department of Energy actually doesn't buy energy, but Department of Defense buys energy.
Right.
And so Department of Energy can fund the labs or manage the nuclear stockpile, but DoD actually is buying,
the
moving.
real customer.
Yeah, and this one is 80,000 uniformed military personnel whose job is just to move fuels around the world.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal. And so if you get that much experience, you learn to manage it well.
Yeah. We're going to open it up in a second, so be thinking of your questions you might have in the audience, but you're here as part of you're a board member of GTI Energy.
Yeah.
Introduce us to that group a little bit more, and they really helped make this whole episode possible.
Yeah, so first of all, I think of the energy system, there's electrons and molecules, and both are important. Electrons do things, for example, power up our phone, and molecules do other things like move bulk amounts of energy at different places or give you high grade heat. And we need both. There's kind of an argument, should we have molecules or electrons? The answer is we need both. And I think of GTI Energy, formerly known as Gas Technology Institute, is sort of the leading consortium for innovation around clean molecules. That's natural gas. To handle it safely, but it's also hydrogen or ammonia or carriers or carbon management. And so it's a place where innovation happens in collaboration with industry, but also with the federal government, including DoD and DOE and others, and a lot of international partners. So I think it was an innovative consortium doing the cutting edge research. So I'm proud to be on the board of it. And I've been on the board, I guess at this point, like 6 or 7 years, so I can't remember. So I've learned a lot in that time. And they have some collaborations also with EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute, around low carbon future. So it's a very collaborative entity. So I like being on the board and walking the lab floors and seeing what they're working on, because I think we need every clean form of energy we can, especially if it's domestic and secure and reliable.
Yeah. And what type of companies, organizations should reach out to GTI?
So there are a lot of innovative companies working on novel carbon capture. There are companies working on gas heat pumps, new ways to store hydrogen or hydrogen carriers. A lot of work on ways to ensure pipeline integrity and safety. You think about methane mitigation, reducing leaks, or we've got a conference coming up in a few weeks in late September to October looking at hydrogen emissions, for example, with GTI and UT. So there's just, if it touches molecules, probably if it's an interest to GTI and they have some expertise in-house, and they've got special world-class facilities to test, improve, and certify different technologies.
Very cool. Thank you for that introduction. And if anyone, I imagine you can get in touch with them, but as always, we're at Capital Factory happy to help. bridge the connection. We're glad to partner with GTI.
And I will say one funny, so I told you I'm a faculty brat. Right. My father was a professor of chemistry for 40 years at UT, and he retired in 2005, and I joined in 2006. So there's been a continuum of Professor Weber since 1966. I was digging through some papers on hydrogen, because I do hydrogen work, and I stumbled across one of my dad's papers on photolytic splitting of water, using photons to split water to make hydrogen in the 80s. And he did this paper with Alan Barr, National Metal Science Technology, like world famous people. And that hydrogen research in the 80s was funded by GRI, the Gas Research Institute, which is GTI now. So it's kind of fun to collaborate with NC that my dad also collaborated with for hydrogen research. So it goes back decades.
We just had a group from Space Force, which is under the Department of the Air Force. And my grandpa was an Air Force pilot for 38 years.
Kind of fun to have these legacies, right? And especially if you stumble into it or are surprised.
Yeah, well, it just is. I think these are ultimate examples how we're all part of something much bigger than ourselves. Yeah, and even our generations are, we're building on that of the past,
and then we owe it to our kids and others to do something they want to be part of as well.
Don't fuck it up.
Right.
Who's got a question for Dr. Weber?
Hi, my name's Aaron Garg. I'm the CEO of Watt Up Energy. So we're building high-performance batteries for electric aviation and automotive. So very familiar with the Valley of Death. A lot of battery companies have fallen in there. So my question is, what do you see as a solution to bridging the gap, and what is your advice for companies who are trying to do that?
That's great question. So the gap in funding is real, right? And it can be a death blow for the company if things go sideways. And I feel like there's a place for government, and I think that's one of the places for government. That's a personal ideological view. Like, I think it's a good place for government to help cover that gap for first-of-kind innovative demonstrations, which could be through cost matching, cost sharing, loan programs. They're right. The government doesn't have to pay for all of it, but just kind of make it easier for private industry to step up. And I think that's been really successful historically through SBIR funding or STTR funding, and now LPO for Department of Energy and similar programs elsewhere. So I think that's a good role of government. I think it's hard for venture capital to take you all the way through because it gets real expensive when it's still quite risky. It's too risky for private equity, way too risky for a bank. So you need some sort of innovative funding. And that's something that historically the United States has been good at. I hope we keep it and keep it going. Sometimes if you have an international partner, there might be sovereign wealth funds or others. It depends on the sovereign wealth fund, but the money's got to come from somewhere for sure, or else you can't make it. Cash is king. That's the one thing I learned from the 90s that still feels true. If we're not out of cash, you don't have a business. So that's really key. And I would say just everything you can find. I also think that revenues are really great if you can get them. I know I was saying like obvious stuff, so forgive me for that, but sometimes there's so much focus on getting the growth capital that people forget about revenue. And revenue can be good, even if it's at a slight loss or whatever, just to get the products out to market, get some field data. And that might be done through strategic alignment and strategic partnerships with the potential corporate customers. They might be able to buy at a discount early on to help prove out your technology. Great question.
It almost comes up on every episode now where there's the classic crossing the seed chasm from seed to Series A, but now you have the SIBR chasm. We have all these companies on the SIBR going down this route. Now you got to get it to these other bigger.
And we also now have like Series E, F, and there are later series that we didn't think of in the 90s that happened as well.
We did a $400 million Series A.
Yeah, that in my mind, that's not an A, but that's kind of the way it is for some industries these days.
And we get to pick.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think there's a whole new life cycle of venture financing that actually starts at $1 billion valuation. And there's a whole new class of investors that I hope will unlock this chasm we're talking about, private capital. And it's almost, it really dwarfs traditional venture capital.
You start as a unicorn. Like it used to be, you wanted to end as a unicorn, end as a $1 billion company, but now you start as a $1 billion company.
It's kind of like a new life. It's your second life. And, Aptronic, most people know, is the company I'm referring to, and it's not their first round. But what I've learned is seed is not a round. Seed is a phase. Seed is the process through which you discover product market fit. And ultimately, there's a lot of different financings that can go into that. And then really that Series A is when you're going to go put the rubber to the road, go to market. And things like humanoid robotics powered by artificial intelligence, it takes $80 million just to get to market. So it's interesting. That's just what, we're kind of dissecting this on the show live and the new funding environments, but no doubt there's some much larger investments in venture than there were when I met you 10 years ago.
I mean, when I was at the startup in 2000, 2001, we were hoping to raise $2 million on a $5 million valuation, and that was a very successful startup.
I do
numbers
that deal in a
different.
heartbeat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, and I think there that doesn't mean there's not a bunch of opportunity sub $1 billion. I think there is, especially if you saw more lower interest rate periods, you'd see a whole new generation of seed companies. But we kind of went through the seed phase up until the pandemic. Now we're kind of going to this larger, later stage deal. Anyways, who else has a question?
So looking into kind of the nuclear world, are you seeing many heads turning towards space or terrestrially kind of hostile environments, desert, extreme cold, and what do you think the future holds for that kind of world?
For using nuclear power in those hostile environments? I mean, I love nuclear. So I'm an engineer, I love nuclear. Most engineers love nuclear because an engineer looks at nuclear, thinks it's clean, safe, reliable, baseload power. Lawyers look at nuclear as a liability waiting to happen. We tend to be run more by lawyers and engineers in the United States, so that's one of the problems we have.
Yep.
But I'm a big fan of nuclear, and the winner for nuclear has always been bigger is better. That's been true since the 40s, basically, because of the thermal loads and the high cost of capital and all these things. But there's this notion, like, what if we go microreactors or mini reactors or small modular reactors? And we know that works at the higher enrichment for the Navy. The Navy makes it work very successfully, but at much higher enrichment levels, which then becomes risky from a weapons perspective. Can we do it at the lower blends? And I'm optimistic we can get there, but it's hard because if you want to do a microreactor or a small modular, whatever, a few megawatts up to tens, maybe a few hundreds of megawatts, it looks to me, just from the factories, you need to make a couple hundred to really get your cost declines. That we're not going to get there with onesies, twosies, or even a dozen or two. It's going to have to be a couple hundred. And it reminds me of like Boeing or Airbus with the planes. They don't start manufacturing their new plane until they get an order book of like 400 planes. Then they can get the cost points. And that's what it feels like for SMR. And I can imagine demand for hundreds of SMRs, but I don't imagine demand for tens of thousands of SMRs. And so there's only demand for hundreds of SMRs or whatever your reactor size is. Then there's only room for a couple winners. That's the hard part, because there are dozens of different designs that look good for different reasons, but the market might not be big enough for a lot of winners. And that's the hard part for the market to sort out. So the market gets kind of nervous about that. But that's where DoD could be interesting, because if it's microreactors at a couple megawatts apiece, you can start to think of, well, maybe there's room for thousands of microreactors. So maybe there's room for a half dozen winners. And then DoD could start to have them at all their installations as a buyer of the things. Oil and gas might be another big buyer of these. Also AI and data center. So you start to have like classes of customers that have more money in a lot of sites that might be willing to do it. So you need a willing customer who has money, but also needs volume, because you don't get price declines until you get volume. The technological earning doesn't happen with scale. It happens with repetition. And the reason why prices have declined so much for hydraulic fracturing, for wind turbines, for batteries, for solar, is because we did it so many times. We have hydraulically fractured hundreds of thousands of wells. We have built many millions of solar panels and tens of thousands of wind turbines. So we get the price declines. But we built about 400 nuclear reactors in the world for terrestrial power, another 160 for marine propulsion. That's it, hundreds, over the last 80 years or whatever. And so you really have to get that repetition, and you're not going to get it at a gigawatt apiece, but you might get there at megawatts apiece. So it's kind of interesting. You still need the early customer, because these are slow to build, long-lived assets, but I'm very excited about it. My next, I wrote a lot of op-eds and essays and articles and thought pieces. My next piece is on floating nuclear. I think floating nuclear is really interesting, because we can build a nuclear ship in 8 years or less. Compare that to 16 or 20 years for a land-based nuclear power plant. And if you have a floating nuclear facility, it's got all the cooling water it needs, and you can float it to the edge of Corpus Christi or Houston or Boston, you name your load center. Most of the people in the world live close to the coast, and laying 9 miles of subsea cable is a lot cheaper than 500 miles of overland transmission lines. And so floating nuclear is really interesting, and the U.S. Navy is really good at that. Now, they did it for propulsion to move the ship along, and also some hotel loads on the ship, but you could make it over capacity so it provides shoreline power. So there's a lot of things we could do in nuclear. It requires a patient-rich customer. It requires bulk orders, or the prices don't come down. And that's the thing with nuclear. Actually, it has like negative technological learning. Like the more we do, it gets more expensive, because we're doing really big ones. But if we do small ones, we might get actually the technological learning that replicates other technologies like my smartphone or computers and other things. So Would love to see that.
What kind of possibilities do you think are on the horizon next 5-10 years from a policy standpoint in nuclear? Could the timeline to develop this get chopped in any meaningful way?
Maybe. So there's a lot of federal support from the Trump administration, and Democrats seem on board. There's a lot of support in Texas with Governor Abbott, and Democrats in Texas seem on board. So you have federal, state, and even local alignment. You have Republican and Democratic alignment. That doesn't happen very often. Yeah. But it's happening for nuclear right now. So this is a very good environment for nuclear. It's still hard to build it quickly. And frankly, you probably don't want to build it too quickly. Like there are safety concerns. Right. But there's a push by the administration to have a lot of reactors built in the next 4 years. Like I'm kind of skeptical that will happen. But Westinghouse said we're going to build several AP1000s on our own dime in the next few years. Yeah. We'll see. The fusion guys will look you in the eye, say they'll have a power plant online in 2028. We'll see. But you have 3 Mile Island and others that are coming back online. Right. They've been off. And I think Constellation just said they're a year ahead of schedule on that. I've never heard of nuclear ahead of schedule, but bringing back the old plants might happen ahead of schedule to buy us some time while we build the new stuff. But it's a very friendly policy environment for nuclear for the first time, maybe ever.
Right. And I know recently I think it was an executive order that named a few companies they're investing in around. There's a few executive orders around.
There's a lot of executive orders, these memos and tweets and other things about unleashing nuclear energy dominance and everything. Yeah, there's a lot of support for the Trump administration. There also was with the Biden administration. There also was with Trump won, and there was with Obama, and there was with Bush. So, and actually, you go back to '92, as President George H.W. Bush, they said, we're going to accelerate nuclear. All right, here we are 30-something years later, and it's finally happening. So it still struggles because it's big, but I think it will happen. I don't think it will happen before 2030. Yeah. That's okay. We still need power in the 2030 and beyond. Yeah. Like, I'm on board with that. Yeah. But we'll probably need a mix of other options between now and then.
Really hold your breath and hold on.
Yeah, it's so hard to invest in as a venture capitalist, though.
That's right,
because the stakes are so high.
Yeah. Well, but you're seeing it happen. We talked in the last show about the VCs really stepping up in these areas where we believe it's coming, and it takes like the timeline you're talking about for nuclear is longer than the average lifespan of a venture capital fund. Right. And so it takes
a special investor.
Takes a special investor. And perhaps it takes liquidity before these things even come online. But I think Allo Atomics we just invested in, and they did, I think, just announced $100 million round.
And there's innovative companies out there.
Yeah, here in Austin. So yeah, it's certainly interesting and feels like the AI piece and these hyperscalers might be the missing component to really
a customer. You got a willing customer.
Right.
Yeah,
real customer. All right. Do we have any other questions? These are great questions.
So just more as a follow-up to this, it's great to see that nuclear is coming back into fashion, but along the lines of where the investment's going to come from, I'm kind of curious, where's that big investment going to come from? The ROI is so long-term, and also if people think maybe if fusion is going to be here by like 2050, is that going to be long enough to recoup your investment in an efficient reactor technology? And is anybody looking? What are your thoughts about that?
This is a great question. So nuclear is very hard for venture capitalists because of what Nick said. Like it takes longer to get your money back than the life of the fund. So it takes special patient investors who exist. There are some of those investors who are billionaires who believe in a clean energy future, who are light technology, they're a fan of nuclear, and they're willing to invest. So patient investors exist, which help. There are now customers willing to invest, and Google just made some other variety of rich companies that say, we really want the power, and they will invest, and they can have a timeline that will work for the return on investment. There's just a variety of new kinds of customers, investors that maybe we didn't have before, which really helps. In terms of fusion, the fusion guys will tell you they'll have something in a few years, as I just said, and I don't believe it. And even if it's 2035 or 2040, that's okay. We're going to have so much growth and demand for electricity, for robotics and AI and our electric vehicles and everything else that we'll need fusion and fission and everything else. And if you look at the fleet of coal and natural gas plants in America, a lot of them were built in the 70s and 80s. If it's coal, a lot of gas plants built in the 2000s. So we're going to need to build new things in the 2040s as well. So there's room for all of the options, I would say.
I'd add a couple thoughts on that. First and foremost, investing in nuclear most reminds me of investing in medical devices or pharmaceuticals. I mean, these are sectors where you pretty much go through your whole life cycle before the drug hits the market, and you sell it to one of these bigger companies that then goes and takes it. So some type of pathway like that. The other thing we're seeing across the board, really just in the last 6-12 months, is wealthy families in the United States are really getting off the sidelines in deep technology because they recognize the threat of us falling behind China, other adversaries. And whereas they might have just drilled another oil well or made money the easy way, they're stepping up and they're writing really big checks. And they're doing it, and they're showing that a lot, we can compete with the deals that are happening from these traditional Silicon Valley funds, which are not really capitalized with from these people. And so to attract the follow-on capital to make this happen, it's not like a donation, it's not philanthropic, but there is certainly a big sense of mission that I think is driving it, and you've seen a lot of activity. I'm talking about all critical industries to our national security, energy, certainly nuclear energy, particularly being one, humanoid robotics being another.
Materials.
Material. I mean, I think a lot of what you'll see around Fed Supernova are these areas, and it's pretty exciting in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
One more.
Susan Stu for GTI Energy. This is our favorite question to bounce around one another at GTI. What is, in your opinion, Dr. Weber, the next generation energy technology that we haven't really thought about yet?
The one that I think is most surprising that I've been tracking for 7 years is geologic hydrogen. There are places in the earth where the earth makes hydrogen naturally and even accumulates it. And its abundance is mind-blowing. And it's probably much cheaper and much cleaner to extract than we could ever make from water or methane or any other source. And so geologic hydrogen strikes me as transformative. If it works, it changes the world kind of like fusion would. And that would have a really abundant, cheap, clean, by clean meaning doesn't produce greenhouse gas emissions when you use it, molecule. Hydrogen is an amazing molecule. Once you have hydrogen, you can get fuel, you can get feedstock, you can get chemicals, you can get heat, you can get motion, you can get electricity, you get whatever you want. But it's hard to make. And so if the earth makes it for you, you know where to look for it and extract it. The way we've done for peat or coal or wood or oil and gas or minerals, then the world changes. And I keep looking for the gotcha for why this won't work, and I can't find it. And there's a lot of startups working on this. GTI is working on it. There are a lot of people working on it. And when people look for geologic hydrogen, they find it. We got to figure out how to lift it to the surface in an economic way with the abundance and with great volumes. But that will change the world. It's sort of like, in my mind, the two biggest things that were changing in the future of energy are fusion and geologic hydrogen will have the biggest impact. And very excited about that. It's been in the news a little bit the last few years. People caught on a little bit. There's a lot of startups, just some private capital going into it. The U.S. government actually has some programs through ARPA-E for it. So there's starting to be more programs, and this is one that I think is really transformative.
And do we know which regions in the world, or do we have it?
Yeah, we do. So what's fascinating is it's a molecule that's generated through the reaction of water with iron-rich or magnesium-rich rock. And we know where those structures are and where there's water, but it's not where the oil and gas is. It's Texas, but not the Permian. And it's the United States, but it's more like Kansas. It's North Africa, but it's Morocco, not Algeria. It's the Middle East, but it's Oman instead of Qatar. It's interesting. So the location of different, it's Australia's got everything, but it's in different places. Even France doesn't have oil and gas, but they do have geologic hydrogen. It's going to flip geopolitics in some interesting ways. Yeah. And today we use hydrogen primarily to make ammonia as a fertilizer, but also for refining. And we use it for processed gases and other things. And if we had enough cheap hydrogen, we could make more ammonia, which means more food for more people around the world. It also means more cheap electricity, more heat, more industrial processes. So it's very exciting. And there's been some news, there have been some famous investors, there have been some famous startups who are finding hydrogen, but it's not been produced in bulk volume yet. But it reminds you what hydraulic fracturing was with shale. Back in 2005, 2007, people were starting to really figure out how to get the gases at the time, but eventually oils as well, from shale formations with horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. And now it's now it's so commonplace. Yeah. But it went from kind of nothing to $150 billion a year industry in 10 years. And that's what type of thing that can happen when we leverage oil and gas expertise, but for a different molecule.
Geologic hydrogen. Yeah. On the horizon. Let's look into that and see what we can come up with. And I would love to meet a geologic hydrogen company.
I can introduce you to some. Absolutely.
Thank you. I'll follow up on that one. Excellent. Good questions all around. And Dr. Weber, thank you so much for coming and sharing your expertise with us.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Good group.
It's very beneficial. You're great. Yes. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Austinpreneur. Don't forget to check out capitalfactory.com to learn more about us and join our community. If you have thoughts about the show or ideas on how we can work together, reach out to me directly via email, nickspiller@capitalfactory.com. Shout out to the Capital Factory Dream Team for making this podcast possible, and special thanks to Aaron Handworker, who masterfully recorded and edited the show. Come back next week for a whole new episode.